Okay, and we're going. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give it 30 seconds, another minute or so, just for people to log in and join, and then we'll get started.
Wow, they're flooding in.
They are.
So obviously, we're obviously doing the right things, right?
Yeah, we're up to double figures already. That's a great start. Okay, looks like it's settling down a bit now. Great stuff. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, vSphere Upgrade Completed It, mate. I think Kev come up with that title rather than me. Great title. We've got some really good content for you guys today. My name's Ben Evans. I'll be your host today. And we've got 60 minutes of action-packed, fast-paced tips and tricks on vSphere Upgrade. So we've got a lot to cover, a lot of content, a lot of video, and hopefully all of this will help take away some of the pain you guys may or may not have suffered in the past when it comes to vSphere upgrades. Any questions, please pop them in the Q&A panel. We'll answer them as we go along rather than leave them all to the end because of time. So just before I introduce Kev, a little background on me. So on screen now should be my bio slide.
Any second. There we go. Technology.
Okay. So I'm pre-sales manager at Computer World. I work a lot with vSphere. I've worked for Computer World for over 6 years now, and I've done tons of vSphere upgrade planning, deployments with a lot of our customers. I blog occasionally on the links below, and I occasionally send the odd tweet on my Twitter account when I find time to do that. Apart from that, over to you, Kev. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So some of the folks on the call probably already know me, but my name's Kev Johnson. I'm a senior systems engineer at Runecast. So we've got a little bit of stuff about Runecast in the presentation today, but really, you know, I'm just here to talk to you about the problems that you're likely to face going from wherever you are at the moment, getting to the latest and greatest vSphere 7 update 1. Prior to joining Runecast, doing this kind of thing was literally my job. So I'm a subject matter expert on vSphere upgrades. So I cover vSphere lifecycle, all of that kind of stuff while I was at VMware. And prior to that, much, you know, I also used to head up a team of consultants. So I used to do a lot of stuff, you know, helping people get from problematic places to ideally where they wanted to be. You can also find my blog down there, the podcast that I do with a few good folks. And you can also get hold of me on Twitter as @Kev_Johnson. If you have any questions after the event, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I'll be more than happy to help. So just a very quick agenda, things that we're going to cover off in this session. And as Ben mentioned, you know, we've got a lot to get through, so it's going to be pretty fast paced. There will be a recording available after the event as well. So if you need to go back and, you know, take any notes or anything, all the KBs and everything are called out, you'll be able to get all of that stuff. So why would we want to upgrade in the first place? We'll talk about vSphere 7 Update 1 and some of the new stuff in vSphere 7 in general. We'll talk about why upgrade planning is important, what you're going to do, you know, is your hardware going to be supported? And this is one of the big problems that customers face when they are talking about doing a vSphere upgrade. We'll talk about what your options are if your hardware isn't going to be supported on the latest and greatest version. We're going to talk about making sure that your environment is healthy right now, because you don't want to upgrade from a mess, because you're just going to end up with an upgraded mess. And then trying to find out whether the problems in your environment are caused, whether they were latent, they existed prior to the upgrade, or whether they were caused by the upgrade. That's going to be really difficult. We'll talk about the importance of interoperability, because very rarely do we ever see that all you have in your environment is a vSphere, you know, vCenter and some ESXi host. There's always other stuff that touches it, and it's really important that that stuff is compatible with whatever you're upgrading to. We'll talk about the actual upgrade process as well. So I've, some of you on social media might have seen, I've spent the last couple of days really, you know, I downloaded the bits as soon as they became available. So we've got a full upgrade process from vSphere 6.7 to vSphere 7 Update 1. And so you'll be able to have a look through that process in a much speeded up fashion. And then hopefully, you know, we'll have some time for Q&A, but as Ben mentioned, if you can get the questions into the chat box or into the Q&A panel, we'll try to address them as we go. So in terms of why you might want to upgrade, let's talk a little bit about vSphere 7. So all of these things are, they're in vSphere 7. There's some extra stuff in vSphere 7 Update 1, but again, we're tight on time, so let's just keep this super high level. So there's things like Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. So if you want to run containers on your vSphere environment, Tanzu is there to help you do that. vSphere with Tanzu is the new release with 7 Update 1, which means you can do this without committing to Cloud Foundation, basically. We've got Tanzu Mission Control, which is this kind of software as a service platform which sits over all of these things and manages these things. And then there's the hybrid infrastructure services, and these are the things that reside within your environment and help you to run containers on your vSphere environment. We've got new APIs, we've got improvements to Developer Center, we've got a new version of PowerCLI, and this has PowerCLI commandlets to help manage WCP, which is Workload Control Plane. That's the kind of under the hoods terminology for being able to run containers natively on vSphere. We've got improvements to security, so we've got APIs finally to make those certificate requests to install certificates, so you no longer have to SSH into that vCenter server to do these things. There's vSphere Trust Authority for host attestation. So again, even in 7 Update 1, this doesn't seem to be spoken about too much, but you know, it's in there. It's super cool if you've got super high security requirements. And finally, we have Identity Federation. So the capability to use ADFS to log into your vCenter environment. Expect that there will be other ways to leverage Identity Federation in time. So it's OAuth 2 at the moment, but expect that there will be SAML at some point as well. So you'll be able to tie into all of your other identity providers there. There's improvements to lifecycle management. So some of you might have heard of vSphere Lifecycle Manager. Some of you might have even seen it. This is a new modern way of managing lifecycle of your vSphere environment. We've got vCenter server profiles, so you can export the state of your vCenter server as a JSON document, and then you can import it elsewhere. So if you have to deploy labs regularly, that's going to be super helpful. That's an API-only call at present. We've got, as I said, Lifecycle Manager. You can now finally manage firmware within vSphere, and also there's Update Planner. So this is going to help you decide, okay, well, there's a new version of vCenter available, but if I upgrade vCenter, is that going to break my VROPS, or is that going to work nicely with NSX, for example? And finally, there's the upgrades to core vSphere. So there's some improvements to DRS, some improvements to vMotion. As always, new CPU support. So there's all of those new AMD processors, for example, and VM compatibility version 17. So this includes virtual precision time protocol. So if you need to be more accurate on your time, if you're doing real-time computing, then PTP might be a better fit for you than NTP. There's the virtual SGX. So this is the secure enclave extension from Intel. This allows you to run things in a separate memory space within your virtual machines, and that can be super helpful again from a security perspective. And there's also this virtual watchdog process that can watch various different processes in there, and if processes stop or crash, it can restart them for you. Actually, one other thing that I don't have on this slide is something that came out with vSphere 7 Update 1, which is improvements to DRS. So the plan is now that once you upgrade to vSphere 7 Update 1, you'll see these new virtual machines that appear. They're deployed by the agent manager, and they get deployed to each ESXi host. And the whole idea there is that it's the starting of the decoupling of things like DRS from the monolith that is vCenter, so that you can provide more availability without having to worry about that single point of failure. So let's just take a moment to think about why planning is important. And there's two ways of looking at it. One is you do the Wile E. Coyote approach, and you come up with this wacky idea. Whenever anybody says to me, I've got a really clever idea, I'm going to approach this from a really clever perspective, and this is going to be my cool solution to this problem, I immediately know that that is a terrible idea, because as soon as anything gets complex, it basically makes it impossible to support. You have to have really good documentation, you have to have good processes, and if you start messing around with hacky edge cases, then yeah, you end up being Wile E. Coyote, basically. But there's this famous quote of failing to plan is planning to fail, and it's attributed to a number of different people. I think in this, there we go. It's in this particular instance, I'm going to attribute this to Benjamin Franklin. It's also been attributed to my mum, and also to Alan Lakin, also a famous time management guy. So before you even get started, before you even download those bits, before you even start looking at videos of all the cool new features, please read the documentation. And when I say documentation, I'm talking about things like the release notes. The release notes are long and there's a lot of information in there, but you're going to want to make sure that you cover that stuff off, because there's going to be really important things in there, especially things whereby, you know, if you do this, then these are the implications. So there may be things in the release notes that state, actually, don't do this if you're still running this specific product at this version. So please read the release notes. There's the vSphere upgrade documentation as well. So, you know, that documentation is super important, and there's a lot of really good detail in there. That's going to help you with things like determining, you know, how you get from your current architecture. Maybe you've got external platform services controllers and you've got some Windows boxes, but you need to get to that embedded PSC within the VCSA model. There's the interoperability matrices, and I'll cover that a little in a few slides, but you know, these things are super important. The bad thing about them is that they can only really cover the VMware products. So you can check in there and see if your version of NSX and your version of vRealize operations and your version of vRealize orchestrator, check that they're all going to work together. But it's not going to tell you your backup software, your security software, your monitoring software if it's not VROPS anyway. So please make sure you do your third-party compatibility checks as well. Check the hardware compatibility list. So the hardware compatibility list is one of the biggest things that people skip on, because there's so much data in there, it can be really difficult to interpret, and Runecast Analyzer can help you a little from that respect. I'll show you how to do that a little later. And finally, you know, in fact, not finally, but yeah, just please make sure you read the product documentation. It's really important. The final one I want to highlight, and in all my time at VMware, I spent probably more time than I really should have done preaching vSphere Central. So vSphere Central is a resource that's available. It's an official VMware repository of documentation. It's at vSpherecentral.vmware.com. It's where the VMware technical marketing team and the engineering team, they curate all of this data together, and you can see there that they've got an area specifically for vSphere 7. There's an area specifically for vSphere upgrade. Any questions you have about any of this stuff, go there. There's a lot of resources which will help you be successful in your upgrades. So yeah, hopefully you've never seen one of these before, but generally, you know, most people that I speak to on these kind of things, you know, they've seen a purple screen of death or two in their time. You know, they've seen some stuff, and I can put both hands up and say, yes, I'm one of those people as well. I've seen lots and lots of purple screen of death, and the #1 cause of the PSOD is people avoiding or not checking the hardware compatibility list. So when we start talking about the HCL, you know, what we need to look at is, what version of vSphere are we running right now? So this isn't just relevant when you're planning an upgrade. It's really important from a business as usual perspective. And you know, what you need to do is you need to validate that all of your hardware is validated by the vendor who created that hardware, by the vendor who writes those drivers, the firmware, the BIOS. All of that stuff has to be validated by the vendor. Some of that stuff then has to go and be validated by VMware as well. So things like I/O devices, there's the I/O validation program that then gets them signed by VMware. So all of these things need to be checked, and I/O devices are the #1 cause of those purple screens of death. So what we need to check when we're talking about I/O devices is the vendor ID, the device ID, the sub-vendor ID, all of this stuff over here on the right-hand side of the screen that's highlighted in red. So we take each one of these is unique, you put them all together, and that gets you essentially what your specific device is. One of the other things we need to bear in mind when we're upgrading to vSphere 7 and above is the fact that VMK Linux drivers no longer exist. So VMK Linux was a lot of the vendor third-party drivers that have been used traditionally within vSphere 5, vSphere 6, etc. They use, it's kind of a Linux module approach. Those were deprecated, and as of vSphere 7, they are no longer supported, so you can't install them on a vSphere 7 box. So any VMK Linux drivers you've got in your environment, you need to make sure that there's a native driver available before you start the upgrade. Otherwise, you're going to see things like, I've seen a few people on Twitter over the last couple of days. I've upgraded my lab on day 1, and now my 10 gig cards don't work. It's like, well, okay, did you check the HCL? Have you made sure that there's a driver for vSphere 7? And a lot of people still didn't realize, even though VMK Linux was deprecated a long time ago, they didn't realize that you had these things to cover off. So we have to validate that for every single server, every single I/O device. Anything that's in our environment, we have to check and make sure it's going to work, which is a lot of work. And it would be really, really nice if it could be easier, and if someone would just think of the children. So here we go. This is my pitch for Runecast Analyzer. This is by no means the only thing that we deal with, but it's one of the things that our customers really love about the product. So I'm just going to move to a very quick demo which shows you how this can work. So Runecast Analyzer, you point at a number of vCenter servers. You can point at every vCenter server you have. We're going to pull back that inventory for all the hosts. And we can see immediately we've got problems with the versions of vSphere we're running right now because we've got these red bang marks there. But if we do this simulation, say we're going to upgrade to vSphere 7, we can see this Dell BIOS 2.7.1 is not supported for vSphere 7. It's supported for 6.5 and 6.7, but not for vSphere 7. And the same with this LSI, the PerkH 710p Mini. The firmware on there, it was supported for 6.5 and 6.7. It's not supported for vSphere 7. So, and we can export all of that data, and it can really help identify where the problems are. It can identify where you've got servers that you're going to need to replace, but it can also identify where you've got servers that just need a little bit of TLC. They need their drivers or the firmware upgrading, and it will provide you with links to the various different pieces of software you need to do that. So something else to bear in mind is, if your hardware isn't going to be good to go up to vSphere 7 or vSphere 7 update 1, then what can you do? So vCenter Server has and always will support N-2 versions of ESXi. So if you're going to vSphere 7 update 1, you're going to be looking at 6.7 really. So you need to make sure you've got your ESXi hosts upgraded to a version that's going to be supported. So if you go to vSphere 7, sorry, 6.5. So if you're running ESXi hosts at 6 and they are not on the HCL for vSphere 6.5 or 6.7, but you want to go to vSphere 7, you're going to have to replace those hosts. So you can do that, run vCenter at the highest level, because vCenter is where you get all of the benefits. It's where all of the management capabilities come in. But bear in mind that some of the features that come with a new version of vSphere require ESXi updates. So if you want the latest and greatest versions of vSAN, if you want access to those latest CPUs, if you want the new VM compatibility functions, so things like the PTP, the virtual watchdog, virtual SGX, that requires that your ESXi hosts also be running the latest version of vSphere. So you will lose out on those capabilities, but maybe that helps you sweat your assets for another year or two. So I mentioned earlier about how important it is to make sure that your environment is healthy, and in these times of COVID, everyone should be really thinking about health. But please make sure you know what your current state is. Make sure that you've fixed any issues in your environment before you start your upgrade, because as I mentioned earlier, when you start talking about the upgrade process, once you've done that, any problems that exist in your environment, some may have existed before, some may have been introduced by the upgrade, some may have been introduced post-upgrade. But trying to unpick those things and fix those after the event, yeah, you're not going to be able to do that. So a few tools that you've got to identify how healthy your environment is. There's vCheck, the PowerCLI framework, which has been around forever, invented by Alan Renouf, who now obviously famously works for VMware, also whose house burned down recently. So please, if send him some good wishes if you use vCheck. RV Tools, again, it's another free tool. That's not open source. It requires a Windows box, but you point it at your vCenter server, it will pull back a whole bunch of data on your environment. If you work for a partner, or you've got a TAM, or you've got access to a partner, then there's the VMware Health Check. So some partners provide these free of charge, some partners provide them as a chargeable service, but it's a very, very comprehensive set of checks that get run against your environment, and you get a big, thick stack of paper or a massive PDF with all of this information in. The health check is great. I used to do lots and lots and lots of them, but there is a lot of data in there. So kind of really being able to drill down and find out what's going on very quickly, the health check might be a little overkill for you. There's also Runecast Analyzer. So again, cha-ching, here's my pitch. But before we start talking about what Runecast Analyzer can do for you, please make sure you take backups before you start installing anything. Please make sure you take a file-based backup for the VCSA. As some of you may not be aware, Once you get to vSphere 7, an image-based model for backup of the VCSA is no longer supported. If you use the file-based backup, then you get a completely consistent database backup there. If you've got Windows-based vCenter servers, take an image backup, also take a database backup. If you really want to be belt and braces about it, you can do an ESXi firmware export. So again, you can do that using ESX CLI or Power CLI, and that basically that bundle that you get from that firmware backup has all of the configuration of everything. So you could just reinstall ESXi, import that firmware backup, and your host is going to be configured exactly as it was previously. I tend not to bother doing that. I like to think of ESXi as being mostly stateless, but it depends on your risk appetite and what your change management processes are like. So just a few screenshots from, actually this is a particularly old version of Runecast Analyzer, but here what we can do is we can identify latent issues in your environment. So knowledge base articles that might be potentially causing outages or causing performance issues. We can show you exactly where you're impacted there and show you exactly what you need to do in order to fix these things. We can have a look at your logs, so the syslog from your ESXi host, and we can identify problems there. Now these could be misconfigurations of your hosts. These could be old drivers that are still sticking around that haven't been removed or haven't been upgraded, all kinds of things like that. And we have this all issues view, so we can show you over time what's going on and how you ebb and flow and how you drift towards and away from a compliant state. So that's the last of my pitch for my employers, but I am wearing a Runecast shirt today, so there we go. From an interoperability perspective, if you go to vmware.com/go/interop, you'll be presented with the interop matrix. And there's two ways of looking at this. One, on the right-hand side, this shows you the versions of vCenter server that you can upgrade from and to. So we can see, for example, you cannot go directly from vCenter 6.0 update 3 to vSphere 7 or vSphere 7 update 1. It's not a supported upgrade path. But beyond that, pretty much everything is going to go. So if you're on 6.5, you can upgrade to vSphere 7 update 1 in a single leap. As always, there's some caveats. So if you mouse over that little grey circle with an eye in it, it'll give you some more information there. And then over on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got the vCenter server and NSXT interop matrix. So we can see which versions of vCenter could work in conjunction with which versions of NSXT. And you should check these for any of the other VMware products you have in your environment. Third-party stuff, so things like backups, security tools, monitoring, plugins. So here, for example, that's just a screenshot from the Veeam backup and replication interop matrix. Every vendor is going to have something like this. But yeah, anything that touches vCenter, touches ESXi, please validate before you start doing upgrades. Snapshots also. So people, yeah, so some people will still insist that snapshots are backups, and unless you're Amazon Web Services, snapshots are absolutely not backups. They might be a way to roll back, a problematic upgrade or something like that, but they also come with problems because they exist on the same storage that you're working on. And one of the things that you're going to potentially want to upgrade as part of this upgrade process is the version of VMFS that you have. So if you do that and your snapshot is your recovery method, yeah, no. Also, if you lose some storage, you can't recover from a snapshot because it's on that same storage. So please don't use snapshots. And another thing from this perspective is if you snapshot a vCenter server appliance before you do an upgrade, what you're going to find happens is when you actually go through the deploy point, get to the point of deploying, it's going to ask you for the size, and it's going to actually consume twice as much disk space as required because it considers the snapshot as being 100% more disk space. So that's a really important little gotcha there. So in terms of the upgrade process, if you were upgrading to vSphere 6.5 or vSphere 6.7, and I really hope you're not doing that now, but let's go through it anyway. So the first thing we do is we upgrade all of the platform services controllers within a single sign-on domain. We then upgrade all vCenter servers within a single sign-on domain. If you're running an embedded topology, then these are the same thing. So the first one is the vCenter servers. You then move on and you upgrade ESXi, assuming your hardware is all good for that. And then we've got like the kind of optional side of things. So we might want to upgrade VMware tools. We might want to upgrade VM compatibility. There's definitely benefits to upgrading these things, but it's not mandatory to do so. We then want to look at upgrading storage. So if you're still on VMFS 5, there's some real benefits to going to VMFS 6. If you're running vSAN, there's a new version of vSAN that comes in, came in with vSphere 6.7, and also there's a new version of vSAN comes with vSphere 7 update 1. upgrade the vSphere distributed switch. So VDS is super important to a lot of organizations, and one of the benefits of VDS 7 is it can now be used to back NSX. So you no longer need separate switching for NSX virtual switches. If this is vSphere 7, and I hope you're going to vSphere 7 or vSphere 7 update 1 if that's kind of where you are. And again, a lot of organizations get to the point of update 1 is where we will think about doing our upgrades. So because there's no external platform services controller within vSphere 7, what you do is you start with all vCenter servers. So you do one, then you do another, then you do another. Don't try to run them all simultaneously, because SSO is kind of like Active Directory. You would never try to upgrade all of your domain controllers at the same time. Then you upgrade ESXi, and then you do the rest of the stuff. So upgrading vCenter servers, let's have a look at what we've got. I do apologize for my atrocious handwriting, but this is something I knocked up on the iPad. So this is what I've got in my lab. I've got 2 single sign-on domain sites. So we've got a London, we've got a Manchester. Each site has got its own platform services controller, and those two obviously replicate with each other. Each site also has a single vCenter server, which points at its site platform services controller, and then there's 3 ESXi hosts. All of these are running on vSphere 6.7. The platform services controllers and the vCenter servers are running Windows, because I'm one of those people who held out for ages, and I really want Windows. But yeah, that's if you're running Windows, that's cool. There's a couple of things in the next video that I'm going to show you which are specific to Windows that you wouldn't have to do if you're already on the appliance. But you have to go to the appliance if you go to vSphere 7. There is no vCenter server for Windows. And then we have 3 ESXi hosts per site. So we have a look at the video then. So I had to do this as a video because otherwise we'd never get through it in an hour. So the first thing we need to do is go to our first vCenter server for Windows and launch the migration assistant. This is on the vCenter server appliance installation media. Kick this off. This is only required if you're doing a migration from Windows. If you're on VCSA, this is not done. So you do this, you key in some details, and then you wait for it to say, please don't close this process. Then from our little jump box, we're going to come in here and we have the options of upgrade and migrate. If you're going from 6.7 or 6.5 and you're already on the appliance, then you select the option to upgrade. If you're going from Windows, you select the option to migrate. So there is no horizontal migration, but use migrate if you're going cross-platform. So here we go. What we're going to do now is we're going to deploy a new vCenter server appliance, and it just warns us up there that the external PSC will be automatically converged. So we have to agree to the EULA. And now we need to connect to our source Windows vCenter server or our source vCenter server appliance. So key in the details here, and then single sign-on password. Hopefully I typed this correctly first time. Yes, I did. Validate that SHA-1 thumbprint of your certificate, because you could be getting man in the middle. And now we need to figure out where we're going to deploy to. So I'm going to just deploy it into my management vCenter server. And we're just going to walk through this wizard now. You can obviously do all of this using the CLI as well, so you can batch all of these things together and make, that could make it more repeatable. It could also make it easier to scale as well. So just going to deploy into the compute cluster. Let's give it a nice new name. What are we going to call this? I can't remember. It was really early in the morning when I was doing this. So we're going to call it vcsa1.runecast.lab. We're going to set a root password for it because we're not going to carry across any of the admin credentials from the Windows vCenter server. And here we need to select what size we're going to deploy, both in terms of deployment size and in terms of disk footprint. So we can upgrade, we can make the disk footprint go up. We cannot shrink it down. So we'll deploy it to the NFS data store. I could equally deploy it to our vSAN data store. The underlying compute and storage is not important. Here we go, deploy it to the relevant networks and everything. It just warns you again, the source vCenter server will be converged to a vCenter server appliance with an embedded PSC. And this bit is the bit that takes the longest. So I think this typically takes about 15 minutes in my lab. It's got to deploy a new appliance. It's got to install some RPMs to that appliance. And then once that's done, so I'm just going to log in here. So this is the Windows version that we've got. We'll see this screen will go blank after a while because it actually shuts down that source Windows vCenter server. But we can just see in here, yeah, it's still running vCenter 6.7. I think that's update 3J or something like that. And if we look in system configuration, system configuration, we can see this is our topology at the moment. So we've got the external PSCs and the vCenter servers with external platform services controllers. So here we go, we're almost done. It's just finishing installing the RPMs, that's the workload control plane installer. And we've now successfully deployed the first vCenter server. So what's going to happen now is it's going to move on to stage 2 of the process. And stage 2 basically is where the temporary IP address is going to be used for the appliance. It's going to connect back to the source vCenter server. It's going to copy, it's going to copy all of the data from the database. We just get a couple of warnings here. Again, the platform services controller is going to be embedded into vCenter server. Anything that can't be used with Lifecycle Manager 7 update 1 is not going to be copied. And I think there's one other warning as well. But these are all just things that you need to be aware of as part of the process. Yeah, the proxy settings, because we're not using Windows, it's going to use the proxy settings from the new vCenter server appliance to connect out to collect the updates from VMware. Now, because this is the first vCenter server in the topology that we're going to converge, we're going to have to give it the address of the source platform services controller in a moment. But here, let's go through all of this. We'll agree to CEIP. And we have to agree that we've backed up the source vCenter server and all the required data from the database, because if we don't, then there's no going back from this. So it just warns us here, the source Windows vCenter server will be shut down once this process completes. So we're just going to run through here. It's going to copy all of the data from that source vCenter server. How are we doing for time? We're doing pretty well, actually. Yep, so we're just copying all of that. We're now applying the configuration from that source vCenter server, and that includes everything about the identity. So I've got trusted certificates, and we can see the old vCenter server has now gone down. So I've got trusted certificates that I'm using on that source vCenter server. That's going to be copied across. Once it's shut down, the new vCenter server appliance will reboot, and it will inherit the IP address and everything else about that source vCenter server. So just while we're having a look at this, one of the things it does highlight is this KB 2106376, I think it is. This is the KB that details how you go about decommissioning the external platform services controller once we're done. But we'll come back to that in a moment. So now we just need to log in as administrator at vSphere.local into our appliance. Yeah, there we go. So I'll talk more about the decommission process in a couple of moments once we get through all the end of this. I'm just going to take a brief sip of tea.
Whilst you're sipping on your tea, Kev, one thing that sort of comes up when I'm talking to customers is when they've used a Windows-based vCenter server, it's quite common to put other applications on there as well that are linked to it, management consoles and things like that. So it's really important to do an inventory of that and move them across to another server.
Absolutely.
The VCSA, the appliance, will take ownership of that identity.
Absolutely. So all of those services that were on that source vCenter server are gone. So yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So we can now see that I'm now logged into our vCenter server appliance. Also, that vSphere 7 disables TLS1 and TLS11. So if you're still using those for some reason on your source vCenter server, you're going to have some reconfiguration work to do, but also your security people probably hate you. So we can now see we also get a warning because we're in mixed mode. A mixed mode is when we have two different versions of vCenter server within a single sign-on domain. We can see here, this vCenter 2 is still running 6.7. So now we need to go through the exact same process. I'm not going to make you watch all of that at the same speed because that would be super, super dull. But there are some points that we need to pick up as part of this process. So here we're going to kick off, we're going to run the migrate again. It's going to do exactly the same. We have to accept the agreement again. Source Windows server for this, so this is going to be vCenter2.runecast.lab. And again, same credentials. So we're running the migration assistant on that source Windows vCenter server. And we run through all of this. We verify the thumbprint. We don't just blindly accept that. We're going to deploy it again. We're going to run through all of this, yada, yada, yada. This is important. So because this is the second vCenter server in the topology, we need to point it back to the first embedded PSC on the embedded VCSA. So this is vCenter 1 now. So we've run through all of that. I told you it wasn't going to take as long. And now we have two vCenter servers running vSphere 7 update 1. What we also have still in the topology is the external Windows-based platform services controllers. So those are still running vSphere 6.7 update 3J. So what we actually need to do is just remove those from the topology because those are no longer in use. So let's just kind of have a walk through. I did try to make a video of this for you. Unfortunately, what I did was I went all the way through the decommission process for both of the external PSCs. I came to edit the video and I realized I'd been recording the screen that I had my email open on. So, you know, we all make mistakes sometimes. So from that point of view, I do apologize, but I can walk you through the process now.
We forgive you, Kev. It was early in the morning when you were doing this.
I'm super sleepy. Yeah, so the decommission process, the first thing that we need to do is we need to identify any services that are still leveraging those external PSCs, you know, for authentication, for the lookup service or anything like that. And we need to make sure we repoint those back to one of the new embedded vCenter server appliances. This is all detailed. There's some really good tips on how you can do this. There's some command line jiggery pokery you can do. It's detailed in KB 2043509. But yeah, please don't skip this step, because once you decommission those PSCs, they're gone. They're out of the topology. You can't just put them back in. You would need to restore from backup, and then you would need to add them back into the topology. But that would mean also rolling back your vCenter servers, because vCenter 7 can't use an external PSC. So yeah, the rollback process is not trivial. Please do this before you actually decommission anything. Once you're happy that you've removed all of those, or you've repointed all of those services from the external platform services controller to your new embedded VCSAs, you actually need to shut down the external PSC. So make sure they're turned off. We now log into the new embedded vCenter server appliances. So in our case, we've got two. Each one of them is pointing still at one external PSC, even though it's not using it for authentication or anything. And then we've got some CLI stuff that we need to do. So the first thing we need to do is check that embedded VCSA is definitely using itself for single sign-on. So the embedded PSC processes that run on there. So we can do this using VMAFD-CLI space get-ls-location space --server-name space localhost. So what this will tell you, hopefully what you'll see come back, is the fully qualified domain name of the VCSA that you're logged into. If that's not the case, if it's still pointing at the external PSC, then you just need, there's some other bits you need to do first. These are detailed in KB 2106736. But if, assuming that's all good, then we use CMSSO util unregister, and then we put in the node pnid of your external PSC. Again, that's going to be the fully qualified domain name. And then a username, typically you can use administrator at vSphere.local, press enter, it'll ask you for your administrator at vSphere.local password. And then what's going to happen is it's going to remove that external PSC from the topology. Please be aware, this is going to incur downtime, because the services on your embedded VCSA need to be restarted as part of this process. Now, obviously, downtime on the vCenter isn't necessarily the end of the world, but just be aware, especially if you have any other services that sit on top of vCenter, things like Horizon, things like vCloud Director, please make sure you schedule in the outage, because it's going to restart those services, and that may take a few minutes. Once that's all done, we need to validate that the external PSC has been removed from the topology. So the details there are in KB 2127057. The command line process you need to use there is vdc repadmin, and that can show you what the what the entities within the single sign-on domain are, what they're called, and what, who's pointing at what for replication. Again, that's all documented in that KB. There's a lot of really good information in there, but please make sure it's been removed from the topology. Once we've done that, we do rinse and repeat. So because we've got two vCenter servers, two PSCs, we log into vCenter 2 and we go through the exact same process again. And then what we're going to hopefully get at the end is something a bit like this. Yeah, I'm really good at whiteboards, by the way, everyone. So we've got a single vCenter server at each site, which has now got an embedded platform services controller running on it. We have 3 ESXi hosts at each site, and those two vCenter servers are replicating between them. The external platform services controllers are gone, and yeah, the vCenter servers are now the appliance. So that's the hard bit. 20 minutes to go. I thought we'd be really up against it for this one, but I've obviously done this way too many times and I've got too much caffeine in my body. So from a point of view of upgrading ESXi hosts, because you're coming from ESXi 6.5 or 6.7, your only option for the upgrade is to use the legacy model of doing upgrades, which is to use baselines, previously known as managing using VUM. So the VUM process is still there in the background, we've got a little video which is going to show you how to do this. So I'm just going to do this on one vCenter. We can see we're running vCenter 7, but we have ESXi 6.7. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import that image into Lifecycle Manager. So if we go into Lifecycle Manager, go to Imported ISOs, make sure we select the right Lifecycle Manager for the host that we're managing, because it's a one-to-one mapping from a vCenter server to Lifecycle Manager. We're going to select the ESXi installer. So there's vSphere 7 Update 1. That's the general availability build. There's no beta stuff going on here. And yeah, that's going to add it into the repository. Now that it's there, we can create a baseline. So just select it, click New Baseline. Give it a nice new name, something that's going to mean something to people who are administering your environment. vSphere 7 Update 1 looks like a really great idea. Hit Next, Finish. And then what we need to do is we need to apply that baseline to an object. So we're going to apply that to the vSAN cluster in the Manchester data center. So we go into updates. We need to use baselines because we can't upgrade this cluster to Lifecycle Manager yet because it's not all running vSphere 7. So select the baseline, hit attach, and then we just do a compliance check. Compliance check typically is going to take a couple of minutes, but we can see we're not compliant with the vSphere 7 Update 1 baseline. So we'll hit the remediate button, and it's going to run a quick pre-check once we accept the license agreement there. The pre-check is just checking for anything that might potentially break your environment. Things like if you've got host affinity rules and you've got virtual machines that are pinned to hosts and things, it will highlight these things here. If you've got any CD-ROMs attached, it's going to highlight these things here. But we kick off, it's going to remediate, and in a moment, I'll show you what it looks like while it's remediating. So here is my ESXi host. It's shutting down. It's actually booting up now with ESXi 7, and we're booted. That process does not work that quickly. But I just wanted to show you one of them. I'm not going to make you look through all of them, but they'll come back up. They'll be running vSphere 7. Once you get to vSphere 7, you actually have the option to convert the cluster to be managed by vSphere Lifecycle Manager. So this is the new modern way of managing the software build, and you can also use that then to deal with things like firmware upgrades for your ESXi hosts. So that's kind of super cool. Once we've done that, we need to move on and we upgrade VMware tools and VM compatibility. So as I mentioned earlier, this is not mandatory. I would recommend wherever possible that you upgrade VMware tools because there's extra functionality built into tools all the time. VM compatibility, do it if you've got a good reason to. So long as you're running hardware version 9, you get all of the security fixes from the Spectrum meltdown, all of the CPU microcode fixes, for example. If you want the best performance, you're going to want to upgrade it to version 11. So version 11 is the version that came out with vSphere 6, which is now out of general support. So that gives you some idea as to how long ago that was. Anything above version 11, you only really need to go there if you need the specific bells and whistles that are required. So if you need a virtual machine that can handle 6 terabytes of RAM because you've got, bottomless pockets, for example, or if you need to be able to do something like Microsoft virtualization-based security, you need virtual trusted platform modules, you need version 14. Version 17, there were no new configuration maximums with vSphere 7, but now that vSphere 7 Update 1 is out, you can get even larger monster VMs. I forget the actual numbers on there, but yeah, they are monster VMs.
24 terabytes of RAM and I think 768 CPUs or something.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you've got to bear in mind that all has to be able to run within one single server. So the cost of those ESXi hosts is just going to be phenomenal. So,
deep pockets.
Yeah, very, very deep pockets. Honestly, if you get an order in at Computer World for 5 of those hosts, then I think Barry is going to be retiring.
I probably won't be, but yeah, somebody will.
So somebody higher up the chain, right? That's how it works. Yeah, so upgrading VMware tools is super easy. You right-click on the virtual machine, and it gives you the option to upgrade VMware tools. That then mounts an ISO file in the virtual machine, and that's then you can either do an automated upgrade or an interactive upgrade. This only really works for Windows. If you're running Linux, you should be running OpenVM tools anyway, so you don't use the VMware tools. It's kind of managed by your Linux team, your applications team, rather than your infrastructure team.
And the same would go for vendor virtual appliances as well. So I get asked a lot of questions about supplies like a plugin or something to vCenter. Do I need to look at upgrading the hardware version or the tools for that? My advice, leave them alone, let the vendor manage them. You'll only break it if you start fiddling around with tools and hardware compatibility.
Absolutely. And I mean, from a virtual appliance perspective, just consider it a black box. unless the vendor tells you to do something with that black box, it just sits there and does its thing. For example, one of the things that happened when I worked for VMware, there was a very large customer, and they had an internal process, or an internal process defined, and that process stated all of our virtual machines must be running the latest version of VM compatibility. So they upgraded the VCSA, and what happened then was the upgrade of the compatibility caused the log volume to get absolutely swamped with log entries, and it would take down the virtual machine. It would take down vCenter server after roughly 45 minutes.
Wow.
So they would go through and they clear all those out, and then they power it up, and then 45 minutes later it would crash. And yeah, it's just a really bad idea. Unless the vendor tells you to do that upgrade, don't do it. But for everything else, your Windows virtual machines, if you need those extra functionalities, by all means upgrade them. You can also set, as you can see on this slide here, you can set an option to specify a default VM compatibility level at the cluster, so that whenever you deploy a new virtual machine, by default, it will be at that specific VM compatibility level. You can always override this, but most people will just go with whatever the default is. And in terms of virtual machines that you have, there's this scheduled VM compatibility upgrade. So you select the version that you want to go to, and the next time that virtual machine reboots, what's actually going to happen is VMware will intercept that reboot. It will turn it into a shutdown. It will upgrade the VM compatibility, and then it will immediately power the virtual machine back up. So it's important to understand that that is not something that happens as part of a regular reboot. It's a shutdown and then a cold boot. That probably doesn't mean anything to most people, but if it's something that's required in order to get things like CPU microcode fixes into virtual machines. And I would also strongly recommend that you check that box if you have the option there to only upgrade after a normal guest OS shutdown. You don't want a machine that's blue screened and then it comes back up, and also because on top of the fact that it's blue screened, you've got this new virtual hardware, so you may have new virtual hardware devices that have been presented to it. Upgrading storage. So storage-wise, there's a couple of things to bear in mind. VMFS 6, so you may still be running VMFS 5. You may be old enough like me to remember VMFS 3 and how when you move from VMFS 3 to VMFS 5, you right-clicked on a data store and you selected upgrade VMFS. It's not as simple as that to go to VMFS 6. So what we need to do, we need to create a brand new VMFS 6 data store. We then need to storage vMotion our workloads off the old VMFS 5 to the VMFS 6 data store. And then once we've done that, we get rid of the old VMFS 5. So you need to have a little bit of swing space within your storage on your SAN if that's what you're going to be doing. There's Power CLI available that can help you with that. If you're using vSAN, what you're going to see after you've upgraded your ESXi host, you'll see this alarm which says the disk format version. We've got this warning. So we come in here, we select the cluster, we go to configure. And then we go down to to vSAN and select disk management. And this is going to ask us to do a pre-check. So don't skip the pre-check. I know that there is this option to just hit upgrade. Please make sure you do the pre-check first. The pre-check doesn't take very long at all. However, upgrading from version 10, which is the version I had in the lab prior to this, to version 13, it does require a reformat of all of those virtual disks. So this may take some time, and you might want to consider allowing reduced redundancy to reduce the amount of time that this is going to take to occur. This, I think, took about 15-20 minutes in my lab, but obviously I've speeded it up for you folks because you don't want to have to watch that for the rest of the afternoon or rest of the day. So that's the storage. Networking is super easy. So we come in here and we can see, we select our vSphere distributed switch. We can see it's running version 6.6.0. So the first thing we need to do is take a backup, do settings, export configuration. And the reason for this is that there is no option to downgrade your vSphere distributed switch. It's really good practice to take a backup of your switch configuration periodically anyway, because if anything goes wrong, it's really important to be able to restore this config. So we take that backup, we can see, we get a zip file, it's 9K. In your production environment, that file might be a little bit bigger. But then we see upgrades available. If we click on that, it says our switch is not the latest version. So 6.6 is the version that came with vSphere 6.7. We just go in, upgrade distributed switch. The only option we've got is to go to the VDS 7. We can check, we can see all our ESXi hosts are compatible with the new version, and then we hit finish, and then we're done. We can see up there that version has now changed from 6.6.0 to version 7. And on that note, I think that is the fastest I've ever done one of these sessions. So on that note, our upgrade is complete. So that's kind of cool. We've upgraded all of our infrastructure. We've upgraded vCenter server. We've got rid of those old PSCs that we don't need anymore. You know, make sure that you do things like if you are backing up those old PSCs, remove them from your backup job. Maybe have taken a final backup before that happens. But yeah, so we've got a few minutes. Ben, is anything you can kind of think of that you might want to do after you've done these upgrades?
There are quite a few things you probably should do after doing this. It's very tempting to think, well, I've done all this hard work, I've done all my prep, my planning, my upgrade's gone so smoothly, you know, my job's done, sit back, put my feet up. But, you know, there's a few things you should probably look at in your environment. So certainly you're going to be taking backups of your workload. So you've done a big change in your environment. You've moved a major version of vSphere from 6.5 to 6.5 or 6.7 to 7. So make sure your backups are working. Make sure you test your backups so you can restore from those backups and everything's good and working as it should be.
That's a great point, actually. The test that you can restore those backups, because that is one of the things that I know so many people who take their backups and they just trust that their backups are fine because the backup job completed successfully. And they never test it.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, good, I've got a green tick, so I'm going to trust that. But
yeah,
the proof's in the pudding. Go and test it. Make sure you can actually do a restore, recover.
Absolutely.
The same applies to DR as well. So a lot of you out there will use some form of DR, whether that be VMware Site Recovery Manager, something with Veeam, something with Zerto, Recover Point, whatever solution it is you're using. Do a test failover. You know, schedule in straight after you've done your upgrade that process to make sure that you can recover your environment as you need to meet your SLAs and things like that. You know, ransomware is rife at the moment. We all need to be checking backups and DRs regularly as we can to make sure that we are unfortunate enough to be struck by those sorts of disasters. We can recover. And the excuse of, oh, I upgraded it and now it no longer works isn't really sort of a valid argument anymore in this day and age.
Yeah. I guess I'd just reiterate everything you just said there. I think all of those things are super important, and it's really important to do them now when you've just finished the upgrade, because if you run in production for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and it's only then that you go ahead and go, okay, right, we're going to test our DR, and even though you've checked the interoperability matrix and everything says it works, something doesn't work. And so you get on the call with the support teams, and they go, okay, you're going to have to do a rollback.
Well, there's a bug that we've discovered.
There's a lot of stuff happened in that time. So yeah, please check that as soon as you've done your upgrades.
I would argue the case it should be part of the upgrade plan. So, don't stop once you've got to vSphere 7, just do these last steps to complete the progress. The last step really is documentation. I am a massive fan of documentation, partly because I've got a very poor memory. So I have to do things and forgot I've done them or forgot what versions we're on, and someone can ask me a question, I'll be like, yeah, I think it's on version such and such, but that's no good. So someone needs to know what versions are on. If they're doing a project or something like that, there's another business unit doing a piece of work, they need to know from their perspective what version things are on. They need to do their own checks and balances against things. Documentation is really important, and it should be, the final thing you do as part of this process before it gets signed off to say a fully documented solution. All the version numbers, the build numbers are all captured and all up to date. And there are tools and scripts that you can run to gather all this information for you, so you don't think I've got to sit there for hours on end clicking through vCenter to write it all down. You can easily write a script that will pull that information out for you into a nice report that you can just then file away or share with any other teams.
Absolutely. And I did mention earlier that as part of one of the things that was introduced with vSphere 7 Update 1 is these new agent virtual machines that will be deployed automatically into your cluster. So you will see 3 agent machines that just appear, and you might not know what they are. If you want to learn a bit more about that, Niels Hagert put something out on the vSphere blog explaining what these are for. Some people seem to be a little confused. Some people seem really angry on Twitter about these things, but I think it's a really cool direction. The whole idea that we're deploying this kind of decoupled control plane so that we don't have to worry about the fact that vCenter's down anymore, because we've still got things that can manage DRS. So obviously HA works without vCenter anyway, but DRS still requires a process running on vCenter to kick off these kind of workload balancing mechanisms. So yeah, don't worry about that. If you want to learn more, go to the vSphere blog, read Niels's documentation. It's awesome. But on that note, I think we've probably covered everything, and we've actually still got a couple of minutes. So I don't know, have we had any questions coming on the Q&A, Ben?
We have, but just to follow on from sort of my side on that point you just made there, I think it's quite interesting that they're doing this. And what I would like to see happen is microservices inside ESXi. So it'd be really good if we can see those sorts of things moving into the kernel. So it's distributed. And, you know, VMware will always say at the moment, there's everything's about Kubernetes and how they do containerized workloads, and bringing those services out of vCenter is only a positive thing in my mind. It is a monolith. Yes, there's vCenter HA. That's got some limitations. Breaking it down and starting to distribute it a bit more makes it truly available and makes you less reliant on that big application that is vCenter. So I think it's good. It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're betting heavily on Kubernetes, and I think, you know, in all the kind of conversations that I had with customers about the problem, you know, if you're running vCloud Director and your vCenter server goes down, then your business has got a problem. So you've got this really critical single point of failure. So the ability to, you know, maybe we'll see more of these services, you know, not just DRS, but other services that are required that compose vCenter move out of that monolith. And, you know, just kind of leverage Kubernetes to schedule them wherever needed, so that when one container fails, when one pod fails, Kubernetes can just spin up as many as are needed. Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So first question from Nash. Just clarification, you can run vCenter v7 and the host can stay on 6.5. If your hosts aren't compatible with 7, you won't be able to take advantage of any new features that would apply to the hosts.
So it depends on so some of the new features are driven by vCenter server. Some of the new features are driven by they actually require new code at the ESXi level. So yeah, as I mentioned, things like new VM compatibility levels. If your hosts are staying at 6.5, then you're only going to be able to run at the VM compatibility level for 6.5, because otherwise, what's going to happen is you upgrade the VM compatibility level, and now those VMs can't run on those virtual machines. Can't run on those ESXi hosts. Hope that makes sense. If not, hit me up on Twitter after the event, and you know, I'm at Kev_Johnson, and I'll be happy to kind of talk a little bit more detail, and I can point you to some documentation on that.
Okay, cool. Next question from Tarek. Regarding new drivers models you spoke about, does this mean if new drivers are vendor released, I won't be able to install it anymore in 7.x?
If they are VMK Linux drivers, you will not be able to install them on vSphere 7. They will not run. And this is, you know, from a security perspective as well, VMK Linux comes with a number of problems, and from a performance perspective as well. So any new vendor drivers should be available as native inbox drivers. So the vendors will be working with VMware. So, you know, you should see new drivers available from the likes of HPE, from the likes of Dell, from the likes of Mellanox and Intel. They will be working with VMware to get native inbox drivers available for their hardware. That's assuming that they're not going to just go, okay, right, well, we built those, we sold those pieces of tin 10 years ago, we're not going to put any effort into developing any change for them. So if you're running on legacy hardware, you might have a problem there. But yeah, it's not that new drivers can't be installed into vSphere 7, it's that those drivers need to follow the native driver model, the inbox driver model. So they would actually come through the VMware support channels anyway.
Okay, fantastic. I think that's it for questions. I'm just conscious we've only got 2 minutes left, so probably
how's that for timing, eh?
Good time to wrap up. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks very much to everyone for coming along for this. I'm just going to very quickly mention again some business benefits of Runecast Analyzer. We're looking to help you save time by identifying problems in your environment that could potentially be causing issues. These things are already documented. There's 28,000 knowledge base articles in the English language. So we're looking to correlate, you know, the problems that you might already have that you don't even know about, help you save time by removing those outages, helping you improve security by scanning against PCI DSS, HIPAA, CIS, all of these different standards, helping you to minimize risk with continuous compliance. So again, this kind of ties in with the security side of things, and to help you reduce costs by removing outages. And if anyone here is a sysadmin, I used to be a sysadmin. Ben, I guess you used to be a sysadmin at some point.
Did. Yeah.
One of the things that Runecast Analyzer are really, what we really want to do is give you back your weekends, give you back your evenings, so you can leave work at 5 p.m. and not have to worry that something's going to go bang. And on that note, if anyone's interested in any more information about the topics that we've discussed today, please go to www.computerworld.co.uk/vSphere upgrade. There's a little form there. They'll be able to help you out from there. Or as I say, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Kev_Johnson. Or Ben, you're at the VCave. I think I got that right.
You did indeed, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thanks to everyone who stayed all the way to the end. Again, I hope it was helpful for you. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Kev, and thank you for all our attendees. We'll send the recording out afterwards in the link, and anyone who missed it can obviously register and watch it on demand. But that's all from us today, and hopefully catch you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.